Dear friends, in today's fast-paced world where every second feels like a race and silence has become rare, many of us forget the gentle, sacred relationships that once defined who we are. We grow up, move away, and chase dreams across cities and continents, yet somewhere deep inside, the voices that first shaped our hearts still whisper, "Don't forget where you came from." To honor your father and your mother, those ancient words still echo across time. But in a world of independence and technology, what does honor really mean? For many modern families, it's no longer about blind obedience. It's about something deeper: respect, empathy, and gratitude. In the American culture of self-reliance, we're taught to stand on our own. But honoring our parents doesn't mean losing that independence. It means remembering the foundation on which it was built. Every confident step we take was made possible by the hands that once steadied us. An article from Catholic Stand says, "To honor someone is to recognize their sacred dignity, even when the relationship is imperfect." Truth is timeless. We don't honor our parents because they are flawless. We honor them because love itself is sacred. Let me tell you a story. A woman from Texas once shared that her father never said the words, "I love you." For years, resentment grew between them. One day she read a story titled, "How Can You Honor Parents When You Feel They Don't Deserve It?" And something shifted in her heart. She picked up the phone and called him. The silence was heavy, words didn't come easily. But that single phone call became a bridge. "I didn't do it because he changed," she said. "I did it because I did." That is what grace looks like, when forgiveness becomes the highest form of honor. Family Life, a Christian foundation, once wrote that honoring is choosing gratitude even when the past hurts. It's not about pretending that everything was fine. It's about refusing to let bitterness define you. You can set healthy boundaries, protect your peace, and still honor the humanity in your parents, even if all you can offer is prayer. There's a man named David from Chicago who hadn't spoken to his father in over 10 years. "I thought cutting him off made me strong," he said, "but it only made me lonely." When his father became sick, he finally visited him, not out of guilt, but out of peace. "When I held his hand," David said softly, "I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was free." That's what happens when we choose love over pride. It doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. Honoring our parents in a modern world might look simple: helping your mom with her phone, visiting your dad on weekends, or saying thank you even when it feels awkward. But small acts of kindness carry divine power. They whisper, "You still matter. You're still loved." The Catholic Spirit writes, "We honor parents with love, prayer, gratitude, and obedience, but only obedience rooted in truth." True honor isn't submission, it's communion. When two generations meet in humility and say, "I'm still learning how to love you." And for those who no longer have their parents with them, honoring becomes something even more profound. Living in a way that keeps their light alive. Every act of kindness, every word of forgiveness, every prayer whispered in love, those are the candles we light for them now. As we draw near to the close of this reflection, I invite you to pause and ask yourself, when was the last time you told your parents you loved them? When was the last time you forgave them, or yourself, for the things left unsaid? It's never too late, because to honor our parents is to honor the God who gave us life through them. Love doesn't erase the pain, it transforms it. And so as we begin this journey together, let this truth sink in. The way we love our parents may be the clearest way the world sees God's love through us. Dear friends, every family has a story, and not every story is easy to tell. Some are filled with laughter and warm memories, Sunday dinners, old photo albums, and the comfort of home. But others carry silence, misunderstanding, or pain. There are wounds that time hasn't healed, words that were never spoken, and apologies that never came. In the United States, where independence is a virtue, we often learn to hide our pain behind strength. We say, "I'm fine," when our hearts are heavy. We learn to survive by staying busy, successful, distracted. But no matter how far we run, the echoes of our families remain. Because love, even when it's broken, still lives in the deepest part of who we are. A Christian writer once said, "God does not erase our scars, He redeems them." That truth lies at the heart of every family's healing journey. The past cannot be undone, but it can be transformed. Healing begins not with forgetting, but with forgiving. And forgiveness is never weakness. It is courage at its most divine. The website christianparenting.org shared a story of a woman named Rachel. For years, she avoided her mother because of constant criticism. "I thought distance was peace," she said, but really it was loneliness. When her mother fell ill, Rachel faced a choice: to stay angry or to show up. One day, she brought soup to her mother's home and simply said, "I know we've hurt each other, but I want to start again." Her mother wept. That moment didn't erase the past, but it broke the silence. And sometimes, breaking silence is the first miracle. Many of us come from families where love was expressed imperfectly. Parents did their best with what they knew, and sometimes that wasn't enough. Some of us carry the pain of absence, neglect, or words that cut too deep. Yet even in those stories, God can write redemption. The Family Life Foundation teaches that healing begins when we see our parents not as heroes or villains, but as human beings, fragile, flawed, and in need of grace, just like us. In American culture, where emotional expression varies so widely, from families who never say "I love you" to those who say it daily, love can sometimes feel confusing. We want connection, but we fear vulnerability. We want closeness, but we build walls. Yet love, real love, always finds a way to reach across the distance. There's a beautiful message in The Amazing Power of Honoring Your Parents, where the author wrote, "When I began to see my father through the eyes of grace, I stopped needing him to be perfect." That is where peace begins. Healing does not require perfection. It requires perspective. When we shift from judgment to compassion, resentment starts to lose its grip. Some people fear that forgiveness means letting others off the hook. But forgiveness isn't saying, "What you did was okay." It's saying, "I refuse to carry this pain any longer." You're not freeing them, you're freeing yourself. As one pastor said, bitterness is drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. When we forgive, we pour out the poison and let God fill us with peace instead. Let's pause here and breathe. Think of that one person in your family, maybe a parent, maybe a sibling, with whom things are not right. Think of what you wish you could say if fear wasn't holding you back. Sometimes all God asks is that we take the first small step, a message, a prayer, a gesture. Healing rarely begins with a grand act, it begins with willingness. There's a story from boundless.org about a man named Kyle who spent years angry at his dad for leaving their family. He built a life far away with success and friends, but a quiet ache followed him everywhere. One day he heard a sermon about forgiveness that ended with the line, "Don't let your pain become your identity." That night, he wrote a letter to his father. He didn't know if he'd ever send it, but he wrote it anyway. It was like something heavy left my chest, and he said, "That letter didn't fix my father, it fixed me." Sometimes healing happens even when the other person never apologizes, because healing isn't about them, it's about you and God. The moment you release anger, you make space for peace to enter. And for those whose parents are no longer here, it's not too late. You can still honor and forgive in your heart. You can whisper a prayer, light a candle, or write a letter you'll never send. Heaven listens. Love, once released, never goes unheard. The United Church of God once wrote that honoring hard to honor parents is not about pretending pain doesn't exist. It's about choosing grace instead of bitterness. Grace doesn't ignore truth, it redeems it. As we near the end of this reflection, remember this. Healing family wounds isn't about rewriting history. It's about reclaiming your peace. You cannot change the past, but you can decide that it will no longer define you. And perhaps one day, you will look back and realize that the wound that once hurt the most became the place where God's light entered first. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means remembering with love instead of anger. Dear friends, every generation believes the one before it doesn't understand, and the one after it doesn't listen. It's a story as old as time. Parents worry that the world is changing too fast. Children believe their parents are stuck in the past. And somewhere between those two perspectives lies the truth. Love that wants to protect and love that wants to grow. In America today, the gap between generations has become more visible than ever. Technology has redefined how we communicate. Conversations once shared at the dinner table are now exchanged through text messages, emojis, and short videos. Parents who grew up writing letters now raise children who speak in notifications. And in that space of rapid change, many families lose what matters most: connection. But here's a truth we often forget. While generations may differ in habits, values, and speed, the longing of every human heart remains the same: to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved. The Family Life Organization once wrote that the best bridge between generations isn't agreement, it's empathy. Understanding doesn't require you to share the same experience. It only asks that you care enough to listen. Let me tell you about Sam and his father, Bill. Sam is 25, a software engineer who loves new ideas and independence. Bill is 60, a retired firefighter who values hard work and tradition. They used to argue about everything: careers, politics, faith. One Thanksgiving, after yet another argument, Sam said, "Dad, you never listen." And Bill replied, "Son, you never ask." That night, something changed. They stayed at the table and simply shared stories, not opinions, not debates, just stories. Sam learned about the fire Bill fought in his 20s that almost took his life. Bill learned about the pressure Sam felt to succeed in a world that never stops moving. By the end of the evening, they didn't agree on everything, but they understood each other. Sometimes, understanding is the only agreement we need. Catholic Stand once reflected that honoring parents doesn't mean clinging to the past, but allowing grace to flow both ways. The older generation has wisdom carved by sacrifice. The younger generation has vision shaped by possibility. One preserves, the other renews. When they meet in humility, the family becomes whole. In boundless.org, an author wrote, "Every generation is God's way of reminding us that we are both students and teachers." That's true for every culture. No matter where you're from, the United States, the Philippines, Africa, or Europe, the human story repeats itself. The young seeking purpose, the old offering guidance, and both learning patience. But in our modern world, we often trade conversations for conclusions. We stop asking questions and start defending opinions. To bridge generations, we must return to curiosity, to the art of asking, "Tell me what it was like for you." When you ask that, you open a door that's been closed for too long. You remind your parents that their stories still matter, that their past is not obsolete. It's sacred history written in flesh and faith. And for parents listening today, remember, your children were born into a world you could never have imagined. They face pressures you never faced: mental health struggles, digital noise, constant comparison. What they need most is not your control, but your presence. They don't need perfect answers. They need a safe place to be imperfect. A recent article from christianparenting.org said it beautifully. Parenting in faith means learning to guide without gripping too tight. That's wisdom for both sides, because relationships breathe best when held with open hands. There's a story from California about Maria and her teenage daughter, Ella. Maria wanted her daughter to go to church every Sunday. Ella preferred watching services online. Their arguments became weekly battles. One day, Maria changed her approach. Instead of demanding, she said, "Would you tell me what you like about watching it online?" Ella smiled and replied, I like that I can rewind the sermon when I don't understand." Maria paused. "Then let's watch it together," she said. And they did. That simple act turned resistance into relationship. Maria didn't lose her daughter to a screen. She found her through one. To bridge generations, we must trade authority for authenticity, lectures for listening, judgment for curiosity. True connection is not built on power, but on love. The Catholic spirit once emphasized that gratitude is a bridge that unites hearts. When children thank their parents for their sacrifices, even small ones, walls begin to crumble. When parents thank their children for their patience and growth, hearts begin to open. Love grows in both directions when gratitude flows both ways. As this reflection nears its end, imagine this: a family dinner where everyone puts down their phones. A father shares a story from his youth. A daughter listens without rolling her eyes. A mother shares a lesson from faith. A son asks, "How did that help you back then?" In that moment, the generations touch, not through technology, but through tenderness. Bridging generations is not about changing each other. It's about cherishing each other. It's about realizing that we are not opponents in time. We are companions on the same road, walking at different speeds toward the same home. And maybe that's the greatest bridge of all: to love across differences, to speak across decades, to look at one another and say, "I see you, I understand." Because in a divided world, love remains the only language that never goes out of style. Dear friends, in today's world, faith often feels like something we visit on Sundays, a place we go to, rather than a life we live. Many homes echo with the sound of screens more than the sound of prayer. Parents rush to meetings, children rush to activities, and somewhere between the noise, the presence of God becomes quiet. Not gone, but waiting. Yet faith was never meant to stay in the walls of a church. It was meant to live around kitchen tables, in bedtime stories, in the way we forgive one another after an argument. Faith at home is not about rituals, it's about relationship. It's not about perfection, it's about presence. A writer for Family Life once said, "The home is the first seminary, the first church, and the first classroom of grace." That truth carries deep meaning for modern families. What we teach by example often speaks louder than any sermon. A father who prays silently before his coffee, a mother who says thank you before every meal, a child who whispers a prayer before sleep. These are the quiet sermons that shape souls more deeply than any words spoken from a pulpit. In American culture, where schedules are packed and faith is often private, it can be easy to separate God from daily life. But the gospel was never meant to be compartmentalized. Jesus met people, not in temples alone, but at dinner tables, on roadsides, beside wells, in workplaces. He entered ordinary lives and made them sacred. When we invite him into our routines, our homes become the places where grace takes root. I once met a couple, John and Emily from Ohio. They were busy. 2 jobs, 3 kids, constant deadlines. For years, they said grace at dinner only on holidays. One evening, after a long and stressful day, their youngest child asked, "Can we thank God even when we're tired?" That one question changed everything. They began saying a short prayer each night, not perfect, not long, sometimes interrupted by laughter or spilled juice, but real. Over time, they realized that prayer didn't just change their evenings, it changed their hearts. It made the home feel lighter, warmer, safer. Faith, once distant, had quietly moved in again. The Catholic spirit shared a similar insight. Faith is not about fitting God into your life, it's about letting him be the life within it. And that can happen in the simplest ways. Reading a psalm together before bed, asking your children, "Where did you see something beautiful today?" Saying, "God, thank you for this meal," even if it's takeout. Faith at home doesn't demand grand gestures. It begins with small habits of gratitude. For many American families, Sunday can feel like the only day of faith. But imagine if Monday felt sacred too. Imagine if the commute to work became a moment of reflection, If bedtime became a conversation about blessings, if the living room became a space for healing words instead of silent screens, that's how faith becomes real, not in performance, but in practice. A study from ChristianParenting.org showed that families who pray together, even briefly, report higher emotional resilience and lower stress. It's not about religious performance, it's about shared peace. When you pause to pray with someone, you're not just talking to God. You're telling the other person, "You matter to me, we are in this together." And that's what our world needs. More homes that breathe peace instead of pressure. More families who see prayer not as duty, but as oxygen. Because the truth is, a home without prayer may still stand, but a home with prayer begins to live. There's a story about a mother in New York who used to light a candle in her kitchen every night before her family came home. "It's my way of reminding myself," she said, "that before they walk in, I want light to be the first thing they see." That candle became her family's symbol of love and faith. Years later, when her children had families of their own, they carried the same tradition. It wasn't religion they inherited, it was relationship. In the CatholicMom.com reflection, Being the Child of Elderly Parents, the author noted that faith within families is what carries generations through transitions. When parents age, when children grow up, when life changes. A faithful home teaches us to hold on when the world feels uncertain, to trust when logic runs out, and to love when patience runs thin. And for those listening today who live alone, remember, faith at home is not limited to families with children. Every apartment, every dorm, every quiet room can become a sanctuary. You can create a space of prayer anywhere. A small corner with a candle, a Bible, a picture, or just your breath. Because when you speak to God from your home, you make that home holy. As we move toward the close of this reflection, let us pause to imagine this. A family gathered after a long day, phones on silent, the TV turned off. Someone says, "Let's pray for what we're grateful for." The father thanks God for work, the mother thanks him for strength, the child thanks him for pizza and sunshine. And in that simple exchange, heaven touches earth. That's what faith at home looks like. Imperfect people, honest prayers, daily grace. It's not about having all the answers, but about remembering who walks with us through the questions. So tonight, when you return home, or even if you already are, light a candle, whisper a prayer, say a word of gratitude. Invite God into the small moments. Because the truth is, when faith moves into your home, peace moves in with it. And when peace lives in your home, the world outside starts to heal. Dear friends, forgiveness is one of the hardest things we'll ever do. Not because it's unnatural, but because it's divine. We live in a world that teaches us to protect ourselves, to keep score, to build walls when we've been hurt. But the gospel invites us to do something far more radical, to love those who wounded us, to release what's breaking us, and to let grace have the final word. In America, where self-reliance and strength are celebrated, forgiveness can feel like weakness. We say, "I'll forgive when they apologize," or "they don't deserve it." But forgiveness isn't about fairness. It's about freedom. It's not excusing what happened. It's choosing to stop carrying it. Because bitterness doesn't punish the other person. It imprisons us. A study published by Harvard Health once found that people who forgive experience lower stress and stronger mental health. But long before science proved it, Scripture already revealed it. Forgiveness heals the soul. The website FamilyLife.com told a story of a man named Mark who hadn't spoken to his brother in 15 years. The reason? A single argument over inheritance. Mark said, "I was waiting for him to make the first move, to admit he was wrong." Then one day his pastor preached, "Forgiveness is not a transaction, it's transformation." That night, Mark wrote an email that simply said, "I miss my brother." Within an hour, his brother replied, "I miss you too." No explanations, no blame. Just two hearts finding their way back home. That's what forgiveness does. It doesn't rewrite history, but it rewrites the heart. The Catholic stand once described forgiveness as an act of grace that mirrors God Himself. When we forgive, we step into divine territory. We reflect the heart of the one who, while hanging on the cross, prayed for those who crucified Him. That kind of love isn't weak, it's sacred strength. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the pain or allowing injustice. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is forgive and create distance. Boundaries protect love from becoming abuse. Forgiveness is not an invitation to return to what broke you. It's an act of entrusting the past to God so you can walk freely into the future. A woman named Jessica once shared her story on christianparenting.org. Her father left when she was 10, and for years, she said she couldn't even say his name without anger. After becoming a mother herself, she began to understand that forgiveness wasn't about her father deserving it. It was about her daughter needing it. I didn't want my child to inherit my pain, she said. So I forgave, not to fix him, but to free us. That's the hidden beauty of forgiveness. It not only heals your heart, it heals generations after you. When you forgive, you stop the cycle of pain. But let's be honest. Forgiveness is messy. It takes time. Some days you'll feel peace, other days the wound reopens. That's okay. Forgiveness is not a one-time event, it's a daily decision. You forgive every time you choose love over resentment, peace over pride, grace over vengeance. In American culture, where justice often feels louder than mercy, forgiveness might seem unfair. Yet, as the United Church of God reminds us, forgiveness is not saying what happened was right, it's saying I won't let it define me anymore. When we release our right to revenge, we make room for God to do what only He can do, bring redemption out of brokenness. There's a beautiful image shared in a Catholic spirit reflection. Forgiveness is like opening a clenched fist. When we let go, blood begins to flow again. Life returns to what was numb. Our hearts were never meant to stay closed. I remember meeting an elderly man after a church service in Florida. He told me, I spent 40 years angry at my father. Then one day I realized he wasn't even alive anymore, and I was still letting him control me. He paused, then smiled gently. So I forgave him, not because he asked, but because I wanted to be free. That man's face glowed with peace. It was as if decades of weight had lifted. That's the power of letting go. It resurrects your joy. Perhaps, as you're listening now, someone's face has already come to mind. Someone who hurt you, betrayed you, disappointed you. Maybe it's a parent, a sibling, a friend, or even yourself. Yes, sometimes the hardest person to forgive is the one in the mirror. But hear this. God never asks us to forgive by our own strength. He gives us His. When we say, Lord, I can't do this, He whispers, then let me do it through you. Forgiveness doesn't minimize pain, it maximizes love. It's not about forgetting what was done, but remembering how much you've been forgiven. It's realizing that grace that stopped with you can no longer flow through you, and grace is meant to flow. As we come near the close of this reflection, let me say this. Forgiveness doesn't erase scars, but it transforms them into stories of grace. The wound that once caused shame becomes the testimony that brings healing to others. If you're waiting for the perfect moment to forgive, this is it. Don't wait for the other person to change. Start by changing the story in your heart. Write their name on a piece of paper and pray, God, I release them to you. And then trust that the same hands that hold your pain also hold your healing. Because when you forgive, you don't lose power. You gain peace. And peace, dear friends, is the sound of heaven finding its home inside the human heart. Forgiveness is not the end of love. It is where love finally begins. Dear friends, gratitude is more than saying thank you. It's a way of seeing. It's the art of recognizing light even when the sky is gray, of finding beauty in what the world calls ordinary. In a culture that constantly tells us we need more money, more success, more time, gratitude gently whispers, you already have enough. In America, Thanksgiving is one of the most beloved holidays, but gratitude was never meant to be celebrated once a year. It's meant to be lived daily, through small acts of appreciation, through the awareness that every breath is grace. The Harvard Medical School published a study showing that people who practice gratitude sleep better, experience less depression, and enjoy stronger relationships. But long before science confirmed it, faith had already taught us the same truth. Thanksgiving is not only good for the heart, it heals the soul. The Catholic Spirit once wrote, "Gratitude is the doorway through which peace enters the home." When we thank God for what we already have, our hearts become free from envy and comparison. The modern world thrives on dissatisfaction. Commercials tell us what's missing, social media reminds us what we lack. But gratitude shifts our gaze from scarcity to abundance. It says, "What I have today is enough because God is here." Let me share a story. A young nurse named Amy worked night shifts at a hospital in Chicago. One morning, after a particularly difficult night, she sat in her car and began crying. She had just lost a patient she had grown close to. In that silence, she said aloud, "God, I can't do this anymore." But then she looked up and saw the sunrise breaking over Lake Michigan. For a moment, she just breathed. Later, she wrote in her journal, "That sunrise didn't fix everything, but it reminded me that I wasn't alone." That's what gratitude does. It doesn't erase pain, but it opens your eyes to grace hiding inside it. The website familylife.com shared a reflection titled, "Choosing Gratitude in Difficult Times." It said, "Gratitude is not a feeling, it's a decision." We don't wait for life to be perfect before we give thanks. We give thanks, and life begins to look a little more perfect. Gratitude is faith in action, the belief that even in chaos, there is meaning. Even in hardship, there is hope. Many Americans grow up hearing the phrase, "Count your blessings." It's simple, almost cliché, until life gets hard. Then it becomes powerful. Because when you count blessings, you stop counting losses. You start to see that what's left is still enough. There's a family in Texas I once met during a church retreat. Their son was diagnosed with a rare illness. Every day was uncertain, yet the father told me, "We decided that every night, no matter how bad the day was, we would each say one thing we were thankful for." Sometimes it was just, the sun came out. Other times it was, "We made it through today." He said, "It didn't change our situation, but it changed us." Their gratitude didn't erase their pain, but it turned their suffering into sacred ground. The ChristianParenting.org article, "Teaching Gratitude to Your Children," reminds us that children learn Thanksgiving not by what they hear, but by what they see. When parents say thank you to each other, when they show appreciation for small efforts, children grow up knowing that love is not something owed, but something given freely. Gratitude also transforms marriages. A study from Family Life found that couples who regularly express appreciation are significantly happier. Why? Because gratitude turns attention away from what's missing and focuses it on what's beautiful. Saying, "Thank you for working so hard," or "I'm grateful for your patience," becomes a prayer disguised as kindness. But gratitude isn't just for good times. It's for the moments that test us. When you lose a job, gratitude whispers, "You still have purpose." When someone walks away, gratitude reminds you you are still loved. When life feels uncertain, gratitude says, "God is still in control." There's a quote from Catholic Stan that says, "A grateful heart is a magnet for miracles." It doesn't mean life will always be easy. It means that when you focus on what you have instead of what you've lost, you make space for joy to return. Gratitude is not denial, it's defiance. It's looking at the storm and saying, "You will not take my peace." Let me tell you another story. An elderly woman named Margaret lived alone in a small apartment in Boston. Every day, she would make a list of 3 things she was thankful for. One morning, her neighbor asked, "How do you stay so cheerful?" She smiled and said, "Because gratitude is like breathing. If I stop, I stop living. Her words stayed with me. Gratitude, when practiced, becomes the rhythm of faith. Inhale grace, exhale praise. As this reflection draws to a close, I invite you to look around your life right now. Think of one thing, just one, that you are grateful for. Maybe it's the roof over your head. Maybe it's the voice of someone you love. Maybe it's simply the fact that you woke up today. Whisper a quiet thank you. That's where peace begins. Gratitude doesn't change your circumstances. It changes your heart. And when your heart changes, your whole world begins to glow differently. Gratitude turns what we have into enough, and what we experience into grace. And perhaps when we learn to live with thankful hearts, we'll realize that joy was never something we had to find. It was something we had to notice. Dear friends, fear is one of the most human emotions we know, and one of the most misunderstood. It sneaks into our lives quietly, through a diagnosis we didn't expect, a job we might lose, a future we can't control. Fear whispers lies about who we are and what God can do. And if we're not careful, it can drown out faith's still, small voice that says, "You are not alone." In the modern American world, fear has many disguises. We fear losing what we've worked for. We fear being left behind. We fear not being enough. And yet the Bible repeats the same phrase over and over: do not be afraid. It's not a command meant to shame us for being human. It's an invitation to trust the one who holds what we cannot. The Family Life Ministry once wrote that faith is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to trust God while you're still trembling. That's where real courage begins. It's not pretending you're strong. It's choosing to believe that God is. Let me tell you a story about David and Lisa, a couple from California. David lost his job during a corporate layoff. For months, they lived with uncertainty. Bills piled up, and the fear of losing their home became real. One evening, as they sat in silence at their kitchen table, Lisa reached across and said, "Let's pray for peace before we pray for answers." They began to pray every night, not for things to get easier, but for the strength to trust that God was still working. Weeks later, David found a new job. But what changed most was not their circumstance, it was their hearts. "We learn to depend on God, not on our paycheck," he said. Faith doesn't mean we never fear. It means we don't let fear have the last word. The Catholic spirit once reflected that faith and fear often walk side by side, but only one gets to lead. When faith leads, fear doesn't disappear, but it loses its authority. Fear says, "You can't." Faith answers, "God can." In ChristianParenting.org, an author wrote, "Trust is built in the dark." It's easy to trust God when life makes sense, but real faith is forged in confusion. It's born in hospital rooms and late-night tears, in moments where you whisper, "Lord, I don't understand, but I'll keep believing." During the pandemic, a woman named Claire shared her story online. She was a nurse in New York, exhausted and afraid. Each night she prayed before entering the hospital, "God, please don't let fear make me forget compassion." She later said that prayer changed everything. Fear didn't vanish, but it softened. Her faith became her calm. "I realized," she said, "that faith doesn't always fix things. It gives you strength to face them." That's the kind of faith the world needs today. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. The quiet confidence that even in the storm, there is someone greater than the storm. Catholic Stand once described trust as the courage to stand in a burning room and believe that God is still good. For many Americans facing loss of stability, of health, of community, this truth feels more relevant than ever. Because trust is not built on certainty, it's built on surrender. There's a story from the United Church of God about a farmer who lost everything in a storm. When neighbors came to comfort him, he said, "The barn is gone, but the land is still mine. The crops are gone, but the soil still lives. My faith is like that. It can't be blown away." His words remind us that even when life strips away everything visible, faith clings to what's eternal. Fear tells us that everything is falling apart, Faith reminds us that maybe things are just falling into place. And yet, trust doesn't come easily. In a culture that celebrates control, letting go feels unnatural. But real trust begins where our strength ends. When we stop demanding explanations and start offering expectation, that's when miracles often happen. There's a verse many Christians in America hold close. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness is not weakness, it's worship. It's saying, even if I don't see the way, I know the Waymaker. A young soldier returning from deployment once told me, "Fear used to follow me everywhere. I learned that the only way to silence it was to pray louder than it whispered." Prayer doesn't always remove fear, but it reminds us that God is near. The Family Life series on faith during crisis concluded with this: when fear knocks, let faith answer the door. I love that image, because every day fear will knock through headlines, bills, losses, doubts, but you don't have to open the door alone. When faith answers, fear finds no room to stay. As this reflection nears its close, imagine for a moment the thing that makes you most afraid right now, the what if that keeps you awake at night. Picture placing it into God's hands. You may not know what tomorrow brings, but you know who brings tomorrow. And that is enough. Trust isn't about knowing how everything ends. It's about believing that in the end, everything will make sense in God's story. So tonight, if fear comes knocking again, whisper this simple prayer. Lord, I don't know what's next, but I know you're already there. And maybe that's all faith really is, walking forward with trembling hands but steady hope, because fear builds walls, but faith builds wings. And wings were always what we were made for. Dear friends, love is easy to start, but hard to sustain. In a world where everything moves fast, careers, technology, relationships, love sometimes becomes another thing people try to fit into their schedule. We celebrate romance in movies, promise forever in weddings, and yet many couples wake up one day realizing that love, once bright and effortless, now feels like work. But maybe that's what true love really is. Not something you fall into, but something you build, one act of grace at a time. In American culture, we often confuse love with feeling. We chase excitement, passion, novelty, but feelings are like the tide. They rise and fall. Commitment, however, is the shoreline that remains. The Family Life organization once wrote, "Love that lasts is love that decides." It's not about perfection, it's about persistence. It's about waking up every day and saying, "I choose you again." I once met a couple named Robert and Hannah, married for 45 years. When I asked them their secret, they smiled and said, "We didn't fall out of love, we kept learning how to love differently." They spoke of seasons, raising children, losing parents, moving houses, growing old, and how each season demanded a new kind of tenderness. Love is not one story, Hannah said. It's 1,000 small chapters of choosing to stay. Catholic Stand reflected that real love mirrors God's love. Faithful, forgiving, and fierce in its devotion. It doesn't quit when things get hard. It bends but doesn't break. It listens more than it lectures. It forgives more than it remembers. That's the kind of love that keeps a family strong. Not because it's flawless, but because it's faithful. In ChristianParenting.org, a pastor's wife once wrote, "Our kids don't need perfect parents. They need parents who love each other well." Children learn love by watching how it is lived. When they see their parents hold hands after an argument, when they see forgiveness spoken out loud, when they see prayer replace pride, that's when they learn what commitment really means. The United States has one of the highest divorce rates in the world, not because people love less, but because they fear pain more. We live in a culture that teaches us to leave when things hurt, but real love calls us to stay, not in abuse or harm, but in hope. Staying doesn't always mean staying physically. Sometimes it means staying spiritually, continuing to wish the other person well, even when life takes different paths. Love doesn't end when the relationship changes. Love ends when the heart stops caring. There's a story from FamilyLife.com about a man named Mike who confessed that his marriage nearly collapsed during a season of depression and silence. His wife, Amy, said something profound. "I realized love wasn't about fixing him. It was about being with him until he could fix himself." That is love with Christ at the center. Patient, enduring, selfless. The Catholic spirit once said, "Faith keeps love steady when feelings shake." When we anchor love in faith, storms don't destroy us, they refine us. Faith reminds us that marriage is not a contract between two people. It's a covenant with God, and covenants are not built on convenience. They're built on commitment. In today's American lifestyle, families are often scattered. Children live in different cities, schedules rarely align, and dinner together feels like a luxury. But faith calls us back to presence. A family that prays together, forgives together, and eats together, stays together. Not because life gets easier, but because they remember what really matters. A story from CatholicMom.com beautifully describes this truth. A mother wrote, "Every night before bed, my husband and I ask each other, 'How can I love you better tomorrow?' Sometimes the answer is simple. Listen more. Complain less. Hold me longer." These small questions keep love alive. Because lasting love isn't built on grand gestures. It's built on daily decisions to be gentle in a harsh world. And for those listening who may not have a partner, love still surrounds you. Love is not limited to romance. It's in friendship, in compassion, in the way you care for someone who can't repay you. Love that lasts is love that gives, expecting nothing in return. In the United Church of God devotional, Love That Reflects God, it says, "Love is a verb before it is a feeling." That's the secret of enduring love. You act your way into feeling, not the other way around. When you serve, when you forgive, when you show kindness again and again, the heart follows. As this reflection moves toward its close, imagine this. A couple sitting together in silence after a long, exhausting day. No grand words, no dramatic music. Just a hand reaching across the couch, a smile that says, "I'm still here." That's what love that lasts looks like. Quiet, steadfast, unshakable. Love doesn't promise that life will be easy. It promises that no matter what happens, you won't face it alone. And if you've ever been broken by love, remember this. Love that fails doesn't mean love itself failed. Every heartbreak is a teacher. Every ending prepares the heart to love deeper, truer, stronger. True love endures not because it's magical, but because it's merciful. Because when faith holds your heart together, no storm can tear it apart. Dear friends, in every culture, the table has always been more than wood and nails. It's the place where hearts meet before words do, where food nourishes the body and conversation nourishes the soul. But in modern America, where calendars are full and families are scattered, the sacred rhythm of gathering at the table has begun to fade. And with it, something in us quietly hungers, not just for food, but for connection. Research from the Harvard School of Education shows that children who share regular family meals are more confident, perform better academically, and are less likely to experience anxiety or depression. Yet it's not the food that heals, it's the conversation. It's the moment when someone asks, "How was your day?" and actually waits for the answer. FamilyLife.com wrote, "The dinner table is a classroom of the heart. It's where we learn gratitude, patience, listening, and forgiveness, not through lectures, but through love lived out in ordinary moments." I once met a family in Kansas who made it a rule to eat dinner together at least 4 nights a week. No phones, no TV, no distractions. Just them, talking, laughing, praying. The mother told me, "Our table isn't fancy, but it's holy, because it's where we remember we belong to each other." Her words have stayed with me. In a time when the world feels divided, maybe the most revolutionary act is simply to sit down and share a meal. In ChristianParenting.org, one author called Mealtime the heartbeat of a family's faith. She wrote, "When we invite God into our meals, the ordinary becomes sacred." Whether it's pizza on a Friday night or Thanksgiving dinner with 3 generations around the table, the act of giving thanks transforms the meal into worship. American life has grown so fast-paced that silence often feels uncomfortable. But faith-filled conversation doesn't require sermons. It only requires sincerity. Imagine a father asking his teenage daughter, "What's something that made you happy today?" Or a child saying, "Mom, I prayed for you this morning." Those moments may seem small, but in heaven's eyes, they're eternal. There's an ancient Jewish tradition that says, "When you eat with joy and gratitude, angels dine with you." Perhaps that's what Jesus meant when he often chose to reveal himself at a meal. Breaking bread, pouring wine, inviting others to sit and stay a while. The table, to him, was never just about eating. It was about belonging. The Catholic spirit once reflected, a family that talks together, learns to love together. Too many homes today have replaced conversation with screens. Yet, when we put down our phones and look into each other's eyes, we rediscover what it means to be human and holy. One evening in Texas, a mother named Maria shared her story. After her husband passed away, dinner became quiet and lonely. But instead of letting that silence win, she began inviting neighbors, friends, even her children's classmates to join her table. Over time, her kitchen became a gathering place for laughter, prayer, and healing. "I realized," she said, "that my table wasn't empty, it was waiting to be filled." Her story reminds us that the miracle of community often begins not in a church, but in a dining room. The United Church of God once published a reflection titled "Breaking Bread, Building Faith." It said the most meaningful ministry begins at home. We often dream of changing the world, but the truth is, we change the world every time we listen without judgment, forgive without being asked, or pray before a meal with sincerity. In American homes today, many families are rediscovering the beauty of Sunday dinners. Some begin with a candle and a prayer. Others share a Bible verse before passing the bread. These small rituals teach children that faith is not something distant. It's as close as the table they sit around. Let me share a story that touched my heart. A soldier named Ethan returned home from deployment. His first night back, his family sat down for dinner. His wife, 2 kids, and his elderly mother. Before eating, his little daughter said, "Daddy, can we pray?" Ethan bowed his head, and for the first time in years, tears filled his eyes. That prayer, he later said, healed something in me that war had broken. Sometimes faith doesn't need a pulpit. It just needs a table and a moment of honesty. And for those who live alone, the table can still be sacred. When you light a candle and eat in gratitude, you invite God into your solitude. As Catholic Stan wrote, God doesn't need a crowd to visit. He only needs an open heart. Every meal can be communion if shared with awareness of His presence. Faith at the table isn't about perfection. There will be spilled drinks, interruptions, laughter that gets too loud. But that's what makes it holy. Because holiness isn't silence. It's sincerity. It's when grace tastes like everyday life. As this reflection draws near its close, I invite you to imagine your own table. Who sits there? Who's missing? Who might you invite this week? Not for a grand feast, but for a simple meal shared in love. Maybe that dinner will be the start of healing or the birth of a new friendship. In a world starving for connection, the family table might just be God's quiet miracle, a place where faith becomes flesh and love becomes visible. Because when we break bread together, we don't just feed our bodies, we feed our souls. Dear friends, forgiveness. It's a word we all know, yet one of the hardest to live. It sounds beautiful on paper, but in real life, it costs something deep. Because to forgive means to let go of what feels like justice, to release pain that feels earned, and to trust that love is stronger than memory. In a world as divided as ours, forgiveness has become rare. Not because people don't want peace, but because pain feels safer than healing. It gives us control. It gives us identity. But holding on to pain is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. The truth is, forgiveness doesn't set them free first. It sets you free. A story once shared on FamilyLife.com described a woman named Angela who carried anger toward her father for decades. He had abandoned her family when she was young, and every Father's Day felt like a wound reopened. One Sunday at church, she heard the pastor say, "Forgiveness isn't saying what happened was okay. It's saying I refuse to let it control me anymore." That night, she wrote a letter, not to send, but to surrender. "I forgive you, Dad," she wrote, "not because you deserve it, but because I need to breathe again." That letter changed her life. "It was the first night I slept without bitterness in my heart," she said. The Catholic spirit once reflected, "Forgiveness is the most radical act of faith because it believes in redemption more than revenge." That truth pierces deeply, especially in American culture today, a society struggling with resentment, political polarization, and wounded relationships. Forgiveness is not weakness. It's the most courageous act of love. I once met a Vietnam veteran named James. He told me he used to wake up every night from memories of war, not because of what had been done to him, but because of what he had done. "I couldn't forgive myself," he said, "and because of that, I couldn't feel God." For years, he tried therapy, medication, distractions. Nothing worked. Then one day, a chaplain told him, "You're still fighting a war God already ended." That sentence broke something open inside him. He began to pray again, not for forgiveness, but for faith to believe he was forgiven. Months later, he said, "I finally realized, grace doesn't erase your past, it redeems it." That's what true forgiveness does. It doesn't change the story, but it changes what the story means. In ChristianParenting.org, a writer once said, "When parents model forgiveness, they teach children the language of mercy." Imagine what our homes, schools, and workplaces would look like if people practiced that truth. If apologies were spoken sooner and grudges lasted shorter. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means choosing to stop carrying what's breaking you. Jesus understood this better than anyone. He forgave those who betrayed him, denied him, and crucified him, not after they changed, but while they were still hurting him. That's the love the world cannot explain, a love that forgives before it's asked, a love that heals before it's understood. There's a story from CatholicMom.com about a mother who lost her son in a tragic accident caused by a drunk driver. Years later, she met the man responsible. Everyone told her to stay away, but she said, "If I don't forgive him, my son dies twice, once in the crash and once in my heart." She didn't excuse what happened. She simply chose not to live chained to anger. Today, she runs a ministry helping others find peace after loss. Forgiveness didn't erase her grief, it transformed it into grace. The United Church of God wrote, "When we forgive, we imitate the heart of Christ." That's the heart that can look at betrayal and still choose compassion. It's the same heart that whispers to each of us, "You are more than your mistakes, and so are they." And perhaps the hardest person to forgive is often ourselves. Many Americans struggle not with forgiving others, but with forgiving who they once were. The parent who failed, the spouse who hurt, the friend who left. But God's mercy doesn't have expiration dates. If you can still breathe, you can still begin again. A counselor once told a man burdened by guilt, "You can't be punished for what God has already forgiven." That truth reshapes the soul, because when we accept grace, we finally learn how to give it. Forgiveness at its core is not a transaction. It's transformation. It doesn't require reconciliation, but it does require release. It's saying, "I refuse to let the pain of yesterday define who I am today." As Catholic Stan beautifully said, forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. You remember the pain, but you see it now through love's light. What once wounded you now becomes the place where God's healing is revealed. And sometimes forgiveness takes time. It's not a one-time act, it's a daily decision. You may forgive today and still feel the sting tomorrow. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're still healing. Forgiveness is not an event, it's a journey. So tonight, if there's someone you're struggling to forgive, maybe a friend, a parent, a partner, or even yourself, whisper this prayer. Lord, help me to let go. I'm tired of carrying what only you can heal. And if the person you need to forgive is no longer here, speak their name anyway. Forgiveness reaches beyond time and distance because its source is eternal. A writer once said, "Forgiveness is the fragrance the violet sheds on the heel that crushed it." That's what divine love looks like: beauty born from pain, grace that grows from the soil of heartbreak. As this reflection comes to an end, I want you to remember this. Forgiveness doesn't make you weak, it makes you free. It doesn't erase your past, it reclaims your peace. Because when you forgive, you don't change what happened, you change what happens next. Dear friends, there are moments in life when heaven seems quiet. You pray, but the words echo back. You ask, but there is no answer. You cry out for a sign, but the sky stays still. And in that silence, your heart begins to whisper, "Has God forgotten me?" If you've ever felt that, you're not alone. Every believer at some point has walked through the valley of divine silence. The saints did. The prophets did. Even Jesus, hanging on the cross, cried, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" The silence of God is not new, but it always feels personal. In today's world, especially in American culture, silence is almost unbearable. We fill every gap with noise, podcasts, screens, social media, endless scrolling. Silence feels like failure. We want instant answers, instant healing, instant meaning. But God often works on a slower rhythm, the rhythm of eternity. FamilyLife.com once wrote, "When God seems silent, he may be speaking in a language only faith understands." That language isn't made of words, it's made of trust. It says, "Even when I can't hear you, I still choose to believe you're near." I remember meeting a woman named Susan at a retreat in Colorado. She had prayed for years for her son to come back to faith. Every Sunday, she would sit in the same pew, whispering the same prayer. Nothing changed. One day she said, "Maybe God is tired of hearing me." I told her, "No, Susan. Maybe God is preparing your son to hear him." Months later, her son unexpectedly called her and said, "Mom, I started going back to church." She wept. "All those years," she said, "I thought God was silent, but he was working, just not out loud." Sometimes God's silence is not his absence, it's his artistry. The painter is quiet while creating. The sculptor says nothing while shaping the masterpiece. God's silence often means he's doing his deepest work. The Catholic spirit once described faith during silence as learning to breathe underwater. It doesn't mean escaping pain, it means surviving in it. It's learning to trust that oxygen, though invisible, is still there. When God seems quiet, remember this: silence is not punishment, it's invitation. An invitation to listen deeper, to see differently, to depend completely. During the pandemic, millions across America felt that silence. Churches closed, prayers felt unanswered, grief seemed endless. Yet in that stillness, many rediscovered something profound: faith not built on feelings, but on endurance. The world paused, and in that pause, some hearts finally heard what noise had drowned out for years: the whisper of hope. C.S. Lewis, in his book A Grief Observed, wrote, "When you are happy, you feel as if God is inviting you to talk, but when you are in pain, you realize he is listening more closely than ever." That reflection mirrors what so many experience in silence, that God listens most when he speaks least. A story from United Church of God tells of a man named Daniel who lost everything in a house fire. For months, he couldn't pray. He said the silence felt like a wall. Then one morning, while rebuilding his porch, he heard a bird singing in the ashes. It was the first sound that felt alive again, he said. And in that sound, I realized God hadn't left. He was waiting for me to notice he'd stayed. Silence doesn't mean God has nothing to say. It often means he's saying, wait, because the answer needs time. Wait because your heart needs shaping. Wait because the miracle is still being written. In ChristianParenting.org, a mother shared how her daughter was born with a rare illness. For years, I prayed for healing, she said. When it didn't come, I thought God was silent. But as I looked back, I realized He had sent people, strength, peace, everything we needed, just not in the form I expected. Sometimes God's no is His way of saying, I have something better. There's a practice among monks called the Great Silence. At the end of the day, after prayer, no one speaks until morning. Not because there's nothing to say, but because in that silence, they listen for God's breath. Imagine what might happen if we practiced a little of that silence in our own lives. Turning off our phones, stepping outside, letting the stillness remind us that we are small but loved. A writer from Catholic Stand once said, God whispers because He's close. Maybe that's why we mistake His silence for distance. We're listening for a shout when what He's offering is a whisper. And perhaps the most powerful truth is this. Silence is part of every resurrection. Between the cross on Friday and the empty tomb on Sunday, there was Saturday, that long, quiet, aching day when nothing seemed to happen. Heaven was silent, but heaven was not still. God was preparing victory in the dark. So if you are living your own Saturday, between heartbreak and healing, between prayer and promise, hold on. Silence doesn't mean the story is over. It means resurrection is on the way. As this reflection reaches its close, I invite you to take a deep breath. Inhale the quiet, exhale your fear. Let the silence become not your enemy, but your sanctuary. Because faith is not built in the noise, it's built in the waiting. And when the time is right, that silence will break. Not with thunder, but with grace. Because even when God seems silent, His love is still speaking. In every heartbeat, in every sunrise, in every breath that reminds you, you are never alone. Dear friends, there's a quiet beauty in growing older, a kind of wisdom that no book can teach and no youth can imitate. Yet in a culture obsessed with youth, many fear aging as if it were a loss rather than a gift. We fight wrinkles with creams, silence time with filters, and try to measure our worth by what we can still do. But in God's eyes, growing older is not about fading. It's about deepening. It's not the closing of life's story. It's the unfolding of its final, most meaningful chapters. In FamilyLife.com, an article once said, aging with faith is learning to trade speed for depth. That phrase captures something profoundly American and universal. Our tendency to rush through life, always chasing what's next, until age reminds us that what matters most has been here all along. I once met an elderly couple in Vermont, Harold and Ruth, married for over 60 years. When asked about the secret to their long life together, Ruth smiled and said, "We never stopped walking each other home." It was her way of describing love in its truest form. Not fireworks, not perfection, but quiet companionship through every season. Sickness and health, laughter and loss, faith and doubt. There's something sacred about the image of walking each other home. It's what families do, what communities do, what faith does. We accompany one another through the changing landscapes of life, until one day, someone's steps grow slower, and we realize it's time to carry them the rest of the way. In American society, where independence is celebrated above all else, the elderly often feel forgotten, pushed to the margins, their stories overlooked. Yet Scripture reminds us that the elders are the keepers of memory, the living archives of grace. In the Catholic spirit, one author wrote, "Old age is not a waiting room for heaven, it's a classroom of wisdom." Every wrinkle holds a story. Every scar tells of survival. Every gray hair is a line of poetry written by time and grace. A study from Harvard Medical School found that older adults who engage in meaningful social and spiritual connections live not only longer, but happier. It's not medicine alone that sustains them, it's belonging. That's why churches, families, and communities that honor the elderly don't just preserve tradition, they preserve the heart of humanity. In christianparenting.org, a reflection titled "The Beauty of Generational Faith" shared how children who regularly spend time with grandparents tend to develop stronger empathy and a deeper sense of spiritual identity. Because when you listen to someone who has lived long enough to see both miracles and mistakes, your faith grows roots. Real, grounded, resilient roots. I once heard a pastor in Chicago say, "The greatest inheritance you can give your children isn't money, it's memory." That struck me deeply, because what our parents and grandparents leave behind isn't just photographs or possessions. It's the invisible legacy of prayer whispered in the night, forgiveness offered when it hurt most, faith carried when the world felt dark. And yet, aging also comes with loss. Loss of strength, of friends, of control. But even in loss, there is holiness. As Catholic Stand once beautifully put it, God teaches humility through the slowing of the body and freedom through the softening of the heart. When you can no longer do everything you once did, you finally learn the beauty of letting others love you. That, too, is grace. In United Church of God, an elderly man shared his experience of moving into assisted living. "At first, I thought God had forgotten me," he said. "Then I realized he just moved me into a new mission field." He began leading Bible studies for other residents, writing letters to his grandchildren, and praying with staff members. "I may be slower," he said, "but I'm still sent." Aging doesn't mean retiring from purpose. It means refining it. Maybe you can't run marathons anymore, but you can still run to prayer. Maybe you can't lift heavy boxes, but you can still lift someone's spirit. The world doesn't need you to stay young. It needs you to stay faithful. For younger listeners, this is your reminder. Call your parents, visit your grandparents, ask them questions. Let them tell their stories even if you've heard them before. Because one day, those stories will be the map you use when your own faith wavers. The CatholicMom.com community often encourages families to celebrate faith milestones. Not just baptisms or weddings, but anniversaries, birthdays, even simple moments of gratitude for another year of life. These small celebrations remind us that aging isn't something to hide. It's something to honor. I once visited a nursing home in Arizona where every Friday, residents gathered to share what they were thankful for. One woman in her 90s stood and said, "I thank God that I still wake up curious." That line never left me, because curiosity is faith's twin. It keeps us young even when our bodies grow old. As the years pass, the things that once felt urgent begin to fade. What remains are not the trophies, the promotions, or the possessions, but the people we loved and the faith that carried us. Aging teaches us to see clearly that love was never a distraction from life's purpose. It was the purpose. And when the time comes to take the final steps home, faith reminds us that we're not walking into darkness, but into light. The same light that guided us through every sunrise and sunset before. So if you're listening tonight and you feel time catching up with you, don't be afraid. God is not done writing your story. You are still teaching, still blessing, still loved. And if you're younger, remember, the elders in your life are not just part of your past. They are shaping your future. Walk with them while you can. One day, someone will walk with you too. Because life, at its heart, is not about racing to the end. It's about walking each other home. One act of love at a time. Dear friends, there comes a time in every life when we begin to look beyond the horizon. That mysterious edge where this world ends and the next begins. It's the question that humbles every heart, from the mightiest leader to the quietest soul. What happens when my story here is done? In a society that avoids the topic of death, we often treat it as something distant, even taboo. Yet the truth is, the awareness of death can make life shine brighter. It reminds us that every breath is borrowed grace. Every sunrise a second chance. The Catholic Spirit once wrote, "Death is not the end of life, it is the beginning of fulfillment." Those words invite us to see the inevitable, not as a closing door, but as a doorway to something far more beautiful than we can imagine. I once visited a hospice in Minnesota, where volunteers read scripture and sang quietly beside the patients. One man, Thomas, who had battled cancer for years, whispered to me, "I used to be afraid of dying, but now I realize I'm not leaving home. I'm going home." That sentence changed me. It carried a peace that only faith can explain. For many Americans, end-of-life conversations are uncomfortable. We plan our careers, our vacations, our retirements, but not our goodbyes. Yet the most faithful thing we can do is to live in such a way that our last day will be a continuation of every day that came before, filled with love, trust, and surrender. In FamilyLife.com, a caregiver shared her experience watching her mother pass. "She didn't teach me how to die," she said. "She taught me how to live until the very last moment." Even as her body weakened, her spirit stayed strong, still praying for others, still smiling through pain, still whispering gratitude. That's what Christian hope looks like, not denial, but defiance. It looks death in the face and says, "You do not get the final word." United Church of God published a reflection titled, "The Gift of Eternity." It said, "Faith doesn't erase the grief of death, but it transforms it into hope." That transformation is at the heart of the gospel, the promise that love is stronger than loss. There's a story from CatholicMom.com about a little girl whose grandmother was dying. The child asked, "Is Grandma going away forever?" Her mother replied, "No, honey. She's just going where love lives." That's the essence of faith, the belief that love never dies, it only changes address. I once sat beside a veteran named Carl in a VA hospital. He had survived 3 wars, outlived most of his friends, and was nearing his final days. He told me, "When you've seen death so many times, you start to realize it's not the enemy, it's the escort." He smiled softly. "And I'm not afraid of the one who's walking me home." There is something deeply American and deeply human about the desire to leave a legacy. People want to know that their life mattered, that they've left a mark beyond their own years. But faith teaches us that the greatest legacy isn't in monuments or medals. It's in the hearts we've touched, the prayers we've whispered, the kindness we've planted in others. As ChristianParenting.org once wrote, "Your true legacy is not what you leave behind, but who you leave behind transformed." In hospice care, nurses often say that people don't talk about success in their final hours. They talk about love. They talk about forgiveness, about family, about faith. They want to know that they made peace with God and with others. The noise of life fades, and what remains is the melody of the soul, simple, pure, and eternal. One nurse in California shared that, during her years of service, she noticed something remarkable. When people of faith passed, the room felt different. It wasn't heavy, she said. It was holy. It was like the air itself was saying, "Welcome home." That's the Christian vision of death, not as a tragedy, but as a homecoming. In Catholic Stand, a writer said, "Heaven is not a place of escape. It's the place where every longing finally makes sense. For those who have lived through grief, this truth brings healing, that every tear has purpose, every goodbye is temporary, and every soul who loves God will see love again, face to face." And for those of us still here, waiting, missing, remembering, faith gives us the strength to keep walking. Hope is not denial of sorrow, it's the courage to trust that even sorrow has a future. The Family Life article, "Heaven is Real Hope," reminds us, when you live with eternity in mind, every act of love becomes preparation for forever. That's the secret to peace. Not trying to escape death, but learning to live today as if heaven has already begun. I once asked an elderly priest what he feared most about dying. He smiled and said, "Nothing really. I've spent my life talking to God. Death just means the conversation continues face to face." That's the kind of peace faith gives. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of friendship. As this reflection reaches its end, I want you to imagine standing at the shore of a great ocean. Behind you, the life you've lived, Laughter, pain, memories, mistakes, redemption. Ahead of you, a horizon too vast to see beyond. And then you hear a voice, gentle, familiar, saying, "Come home." You step forward, not with fear, but with freedom, because the journey that began in God is returning to Him at last. So, live now with heaven in your eyes. Love deeply, forgive quickly, speak kindly, pray often, because every day on earth is a rehearsal for eternity. And when your time comes, may you find that the final breath is not an ending, but the first word of forever. Because for those who believe, death is not goodbye. It's just the moment love becomes endless. Dear friends, every story we've shared so far about family, forgiveness, faith, and the quiet courage of the human heart leads us here, to the place where hope becomes more than a word. It becomes a way of living. The world around us is noisy, divided, and sometimes unbearably heavy. We wake up to headlines that steal our peace, to pressures that drain our strength, to moments where we wonder whether faith still matters in an age of distraction and doubt. And yet, deep down, there's something unbreakable inside every believer. The light of God that refuses to go out. That light was placed in you long before fear existed. It flickers when you're tired, it bends when you're broken, but it never disappears. Because no darkness is deep enough to bury the love of God. The Catholic spirit once wrote, "Faith is not a candle we hold, it's a flame that holds us." I remember visiting a small church in North Carolina that had been destroyed by a hurricane. The roof was gone, the pews were scattered, the altar broken. But when the pastor returned days later, he found something strange. The sanctuary candle was still burning. No walls, no roof, but the flame stood untouched. He knelt down and wept, whispering, "The light never left." That's the truth for all of us. The storm may come, the losses may hurt, but God's presence does not depend on protection, it depends on promise. In FamilyLife.com, a mother once wrote, "Faith doesn't remove pain, it redeems it." She was speaking about her journey through loss and recovery, and she discovered that even in her deepest sorrow, God was rewriting her story into something beautiful. Every tear became a seed. Every wound became a window. And that's the mystery of divine love, that it chooses to dwell in fragile hearts like ours, making them strong enough to love again, forgive again, and hope again. In the American culture of success and self-reliance, faith often feels like surrender, and it is. But surrender is not giving up, it's giving over. It's saying, "God, I don't have control, but I trust you do." That's when miracles begin. Not always the kind that move mountains outside of us, but the kind that move the mountains within. A man named Michael once shared his story in United Church of God. After losing his business and his marriage, he said, "I stopped asking God to change my circumstances and started asking Him to change my heart." That prayer transformed everything. The moment I accepted that His plan might be different from mine, he said, peace replaced panic. The Catholic Stand community beautifully describes this kind of peace as the miracle of remaining calm in chaos. It's what makes a mother smile even when the diagnosis comes. It's what helps a father keep faith when the bills pile up. It's what lets a believer whisper thank you even with tears in their eyes. This faith, quiet, steady, unshakable, is what the world needs most right now. Not arguments, not noise, but witnesses. People who live with light even when the night is long. Because every day, someone is watching you and learning what God's love looks like, through how you speak, how you serve, how you forgive. Your life may be the only sermon someone ever hears. In ChristianParenting.org, a young mother wrote, "My children will not remember every Bible verse I quote, but they will remember how I treated them when I was tired." That's how faith multiplies, not through perfection, but through presence. The world may tell you that faith is outdated, that God is silent, that love is conditional. But every act of kindness, every quiet prayer, every time you choose compassion over cynicism, you're proving them wrong. Faith is not about knowing what tomorrow brings. It's about knowing who holds tomorrow. So dear friends, as this journey draws to its close, let this be the truth that stays in your heart. You are loved. You are never alone. And you were made for eternity. If you are carrying pain tonight, don't run from it. Invite God into it. If you feel lost, whisper His name. He's already closer than your breath. If you doubt your worth, remember, the cross was proof that heaven found you priceless. And when you wake tomorrow, before the emails, before the worries, before the world rushes in, pause for a moment and say, "Thank you, Lord." The light is still burning. Because no matter how dark the night may seem, dawn is always coming. And when you live with faith, every sunrise is already a miracle. Let us bow our hearts in peace. Heavenly Father, we thank you for every breath, every heartbeat, every moment you've allowed us to share in your love. Teach us to see you in the ordinary, to trust you in the unknown, and to love others with the same grace you have given us. Through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the gentle mother who said yes even when she did not understand, may her prayers surround us with courage, compassion, and unwavering faith. And through the holy intercession of Saint Joseph, protector of families and silent worker of God's will, may we find strength in humility and peace in service. Lord Jesus Christ, bless every listener, every family, every heart that has walked this journey of reflection. Pour out your mercy on those who suffer, bring healing to those in pain, and let your Spirit renew every weary soul. May your light guide us through every darkness, your peace guard our hearts from fear, and your love make us whole, now and forever. Amen. If this message has touched your spirit, let it not end here. Share it, not just with a click, but with compassion. Speak a kind word to someone today. Forgive someone who doesn't expect it. Smile at a stranger who looks lost. And if you wish to continue this journey of faith together, I invite you, with all my heart, to subscribe, follow, and leave your reflection below. Your comment may be the spark that brings hope to another soul. Your story may remind someone that God still moves in ordinary lives. Together, let us keep the flame alive. Let us be witnesses of love that never ends, faith that never fails, and a hope that forever points toward heaven. May the peace of Christ, the love of our Blessed Mother Mary, and the protection of Saint Joseph be with you and your family always. And until we meet again, may God's grace carry you beyond the horizon into a love that never fades.